Children's entertainer and serial child molester Rolf Harris guilty on all counts. And even as he was abusing children himself, Harris made a film warning them about paedophiles.
But sometimes people do things to one another which don't make them feel good.
Good evening. The offences occurred years ago. One of the victims was 7 or 8 years old. They are the hardest cases to prosecute. One person's evidence against another. But the verdicts mark a resounding victory for the police and for Operation U-Tree in the post-Savile attempts to bring historic abusers to account. Rolf Harris is almost certain to go to jail when he is sentenced on Friday. Tonight, the man, the myth, the abuse, and his victims.
Also tonight, 3 Israeli teenagers thought to have been kidnapped in the West Bank by Palestinian militants are reportedly found dead. Guilty of phone hacking, the Prime Minister's former aide Andy Coulson now faces a retrial, accused of conspiring to bribe public officials. And millions turn up at A&E because they can't see their GP. Doctors say the NHS is under pressure as never before because of a shortage of money and a surplus of patients.
And I'm in a small, boozy corner of Germany, in the heart of the city of London, where they may have been happy to see England exit the World Cup, but they don't want to see Britain exit the EU. Although, to be honest, the only thing they really care about here tonight is the game between Algeria and Germany in about an hour from now.
For decades, he was a familiar and apparently much-loved presence in our living rooms. Singer, musician, TV presenter and off-the-wall artist, Australian-born Rolf Harris became such a part of British life, he was awarded a CBE and invited to paint an official portrait of the Queen. But he hid a dark secret. For years, he'd been a serial sex abuser. Today, his past caught up with him, and he was convicted on 12 counts of indecent assault against 4 girls and young women. And be warned, this report from our Home Affairs correspondent, Dashna Soni, does contain some details which may be upsetting.
Do you have anything to say to your victims, Mr. Harris?
A walk of shame for Rolf Harris, CBE.
And so Rolf Harris is leaving court with his reputation in ruins. The man whose lawyers tried to prevent the media from even revealing his name, now having to face the cameras, knowing that the full extent of his crimes can finally be revealed. It is a spectacular fall from grace for a man once described as a national treasure.
What are you going to say for yourself, Harris?
The 84-year-old is on bail and so was free to go home until Friday when he'll be sentenced.
Can you tell what it is yet?
With his famous catchphrase and his friendly smile, he inspired generations of children.
Sunrise, she bring in the morning.
A national treasure whose dazzling career spanned 6 decades.
Rolf Harris had been one of my childhood idols.
But beneath his charm, a sinister man who targeted vulnerable girls mesmerised by his fame.
His fingers felt their way around to my breast.
Today, a jury found Harris unanimously guilty of 12 counts of indecent assault against 4 victims, the youngest aged 7.
Rolf Harris has habitually denied any wrongdoing, forcing his victims to recount their ordeal in public. He committed many offences in plain sight of people, as he thought his celebrity status placed him above the law.
That celebrity status allowed him to target his victims. The jury was told of its devastating impact on their lives. He assaulted one girl 3 times when her Australian theatre group was visiting the UK for a show. Tonya Lee waived her right to anonymity and gave this interview.
He took away from me that feeling that you can never be normal again, and that feeling that you're worthwhile, and that feeling that you deserve to be happy, and that hope.
Isn't it good to be alive on a day like today? Good one, isn't it?
And yet, at the height of his offending, Rolf Harris made this educational video warning children of the dangers of child abuse.
Other touches give you a no feeling. It's like, no, I don't know why I don't like that, but I'm not too sure about that at all. I don't want that to keep going. I want that to stop. That's a no feeling.
The producer told Channel 4 News that Harris phoned her with the idea, saying he'd had a happy childhood and that every child deserved the same.
My body's nobody's body but mine. You run your own body, let me run mine. You run your own body, let me run mine.
He presented himself as a family man. Over the decades, his wife Olwyn and daughter Bindi pictured by his side. And yet it was one of his daughter's own friends who was his main victim. The family lived here in the picturesque village of Bray in Berkshire. Many locals say their famous neighbour was always friendly and outgoing. But behind his gated home, his victim said, a disturbing secret. Some of the most sinister abuse took place behind these gates here at the Star's home. His daughter would often have a sleepover with her best friend, and the two girls would share a bedroom. The best friend told the court that Rolf Harris would come into that room at night and assault her as his daughter lay sleeping. She told the jury it was as if he got a thrill from his daughter being so close. Harris had tried to claim it was a consensual relationship, but the jury heard he had groomed the girl for 16 years.
Rolf Harris was a classic abuser. He was powerful relative to his victims. In his case, his power came from his fame, his iconic status. So for him, the trust was, I'm Rolf Harris. You know, I'm the guy who likes fluffy animals and paints nice pictures.
The man who paints nice pictures, who is even commissioned to portray the Queen.
You're OK with the smell of turpentine, I hope?
Well, we'll tell, won't we, soon?
He faced numerous allegations. Each stroke, said the prosecution, can be a little vague or unclear. But taken together, you can identify what is happening. A pattern of abuse. One of his accusers from Australia, a former radio host who said the Star groped her in 2001 after she had interviewed him on her show.
His fingers felt their way around to my breast, where they stayed. My memory is that it was clammy and very uncomfortable. It was a very, very awkward situation, and I know that there'll be people watching this tonight wondering why I didn't do something, but to be very honest with you, Rolf Harris had been one of my childhood idols.
I understand you're ringing with concerns about a child, is that correct? Would you just like to tell me the age of the child, please?
We understand that the police are now talking to other potential victims. After the first woman came forward, this call centre run by the NSPCC was contacted by up to 20 others, all claiming that they too had been abused by Rolf Harris.
Harris was brought to justice by Operation U-Tree, the police investigation into sexual abuse by the disgraced DJ Jimmy Savile. Its roots quickly spread, forcing us to re-evaluate our perceptions of a generation of household names. Although some have described it as a celebrity witch hunt, it's also forced us to re-evaluate our own attitudes towards acceptable behaviour. Listen to this joke Rolf Harris made about a 13-year-old girl in 1969, and listen to the audience's reaction.
Get them off.
No, I am only 13.
This is no time to be superstitious.
Harris will be sentenced on Friday after the judge has seen medical reports about the entertainer's health. But he has been warned prison is likely.
Darshana Soni reporting. Well, we're joined now by Mark Williams-Thomas, former policeman and now an investigative journalist who was involved in exposing Jimmy Savile as a paedophile. And I'm wondering how long you were on the trail of Rolf Harris.
Well, it first began in November when I first actually was told that the police had been to his address. They then waited for him to come into an interview in that midweek, and I tweeted to say that the man was now in custody. And in fact, it was later on, at the beginning of 2013, when a victim came forward to me, I passed that on to the police. So amongst the whole Operation U-Tree, I've passed on information to the police. And today is testimony not only to the victims, but actually the great result of Metropolitan Police and Operation U-Tree. No witch hunt, clear evidence presented before the court. Jury gave them the time to consider verdict and unanimous verdicts.
What's interesting too is that unlike most of the other celebrities who've been lifted, he managed to get the courts to protect him for 5 months. We were not allowed to report it. We knew he'd been lifted, but we were never allowed to report it.
No, and absolutely wrong. You know, his lawyers got involved, and it was on the, off the back, obviously, Leveson. His lawyers got involved and wrote letters to all the editors not to release his details.
Us included.
Absolutely. I put his name out there very clearly. Got no challenge from him at all, but of course all the press will put under this almost gagging from his lawyers. And actually we know that once that information went out into the public domain, more victims came forward.
And more victims still coming forward. I mean, does that mean there will be more cases? I mean, how often do you, I'm sorry to put it this way, bother to charge a man who was quite clearly the most terrible serial operator, presumably because the victims need closure?
Yeah, there's more victims that come forward both during the trial and the short period before the trial. The police are now considering that. Obviously, Friday will be important as to how long a sentence he gets, but the police will be visiting them, taking evidence from them. And I can tell you, in following on from today's conviction, of course, Max Clifford's conviction, is there are a number of very high-profile individuals, and they will now feel the full weight of the police.
Mark Williams-Thomas, thank you very much for coming in. Kathy.
And Mark Williams-Thomas will have more on Rolf Harris on Channel 4 News tomorrow evening. Now, David Cameron's former spin doctor, Andy Coulson, has been told that as News of the World editor, he and 3 of his most senior staff had turned the paper into a criminal enterprise. Coulson, who was last week convicted of being a part of the phone hacking conspiracy, was back in the dock at the Old Bailey for a mitigation and sentencing hearing. But it began with the announcement that he and the paper's former royal correspondent, Clive Goodman, could face a retrial on
Andy Coulson back at the Old Bailey this morning, and it's not getting any better for him. Convicted of a phone hacking conspiracy last week, the Crown Prosecution Service has now announced it wants to put him on trial again, this time for the charges the jury just couldn't reach verdicts on. Namely that he authorised his former royal editor Clive Goodman to pay police officers to obtain royal phone directories, allegations both men have repeatedly denied. But today wasn't so much about denials as it was admissions. Some very striking admissions from 3 of Mr. Coulson's former colleagues at the News of the World, who joined him in the dock today. At the front with the coffee cup, Neville Thirlbeck, once chief reporter at the tabloid, and behind him, also with a coffee, Greg Miskew, a former news desk editor, a role once also occupied by James Weatherup, all 3 of whom pleaded guilty to phone hacking at the News of the World before this trial began, and who, together with their old boss, Andy Coulson, will be sentenced for a hacking conspiracy on Friday. They sat in the dock as Andrew Edis QC for the prosecution described them as once highly paid and influential employees who utterly corrupted the News of the World. It was a paper, he said, which became, at the very highest level, a thoroughly criminal enterprise. Neville Thirlbeck, through his barrister, today offered the victims of his hacking an unreserved apology, including the family of Millie Dowler, whose voicemails the paper intercepted during one of his investigations. But hacking at the News of the World, he claimed, was a corporate affair, approved of by very senior figures, including Andy Coulson as editor, a News International lawyer, another executive, and the then managing editor, Stuart Kuttner, cleared by a jury last week of phone hacking and who appeared on this programme shortly afterwards.
They were happy that I played no part in any criminal activity, and I can tell you from my conscience, if you like, or from wherever you like, neither did I.
James Weatherup, who the court heard had seen his marriage collapse due to the strain of recent years, also made a startling claim. The hacking, he said, had been endemic, and it had been condoned and encouraged by senior managers at the News of the World. Both he and Neville Thirlbeck made no comment in their police interviews, so this is the first time they've aired publicly such claims of high-level complicity in hacking. It is sad, commented the judge, that successful, capable investigative journalists are only coming clean now as to what went on. Glenn Mulcair, the private investigator and hacker described by his lawyer as being at the bottom of the food chain, was also in the dock today. He too will be sentenced on Friday. The maximum penalty for phone hacking is 2 years in prison.
Andy Davis reporting. Now, 6 million patients a year are turning up at hospital accident emergency units simply because they can't get appointments with their GPs. A study out today suggests a rise of 11% in the number of unplanned visits to A&E over the last 4 years. The combination of a rise in patient demand coupled with a shortage of resources is causing consternation behind the scenes in Westminster. Our health and social care correspondent Victoria MacDonald is at a GP surgery in Colchester this evening. Victoria.
Yes, John, there has been a dispute for some time now over what's causing all these admissions to A&E. And at one point, the government seemed to be trying to lay the blame at the door of GPs, talking about out of hours and their appointment system policies. Yet we've been to see this GP surgery here in Colchester, right in the middle of the University of Essex campus. And they say they've had to cancel one afternoon a week because they're simply not getting the funding. In the middle of Essex University campus, this GP practice will no longer open on Wednesday afternoons. They're being penalised, they say, because the government gives them less funding for younger patients, which is bad news when you care for 8,500 students.
We've been told by NHS England, unless they come up with a solution to us, that we have to make cost savings. So the cost savings that are already starting to bite are the fact that we've already lost one GP session per week and one nurse practitioner session per week. So in order to be able to staff our services, we're having to focus on providing services at our other village surgery where the students would have to attend, but they would have to find transport to attend there.
And that surgery's 5 miles away. So what do the students think about this? What's concerning you about this closure?
It's very difficult to get anywhere else in town, especially if you're a student. If you go to the A&E or the walk-in centre, it's a couple of buses or, you know, a taxi, which is too expensive, really.
It would mean the loss of a system where everyone knows my background, everyone has that support there, and also the time constraints as well.
And each academic year, an extra 2,500 students are registered, so the problem is only going to get worse. So where are the patients going to go? There's a fair bet that they are not going to want to take 2 buses to get to the practice's other surgery. The assumption, therefore, is that they will either go to an NHS walk-in centre or they will come here to Colchester General's A&E unit, just adding to the pressure on already enormously busy services. There is a dispute over just how many patients go to A&E because they couldn't get a GP appointment. One report today suggests more than 26%, while the College of Emergency Medicine says 15%. Wherever the true figures lie, England's hospitals are under increasing strain. Traditionally, admissions from A&E drop in spring and summer, but that simply hasn't happened this year.
The NHS has been ring-fenced. It's done well compared with other services, but we're now 4 years into no growth in the budget. The easy savings have been made. The NHS needs more support to be able to drive further productivity and to treat patients in a timely and effective way.
The government has put more money into the system recently to deal with waiting times and to prepare for the next winter. But as the election looms, they know that a crisis in the NHS would quite simply be a political disaster.
Well, now, Victoria, despite the fact that many people still do have an amazing experience at the hand of the NHS, every day we seem to be hearing new problems within the service. And that must be trouble for the government.
Yes, just off the back of this, I must say that NHS England will be meeting the practice here on Friday to discuss their financial problems, and they are meeting with 97 or some of the 97 other surgeries who are also facing similar problems. But the problem is, as said in the package, that money is very tight now in the NHS. And this is the last thing that this government wants to see as we get towards an election. Waiting times are going up, so they're trying to keep those under control. If there is a massive winter crisis that they can't deal with, then that will be bad news for them. For the other parties too, they will be watching, because the difficulty is being able to say, can we put more money into the system? Now, already we've heard suggestions from the right about whether people should pay to see their GPs. That's been pretty much rejected. But on the left, they're talking about things like national insurance, premium rises. And there has been some discussion about that, because no politician wants to go into the election saying there is no more money for the NHS, but nor do they want to go into the election with crisis after crisis unfolding.
Mysterious murder trial restarts in Pretoria after a delay of more than a month for psychological assessments. We'll hear from our reporter in South Africa on how the ruling that the Blade Runner was not suffering from any mental illness at the time of the shooting may affect the trial. And as Germany and Algeria prepare to settle a 32-year-old footballing spat at the World Cup in Brazil, we'll hear from German fans in London.
Heavy fighting has continued around the Iraqi city of Tikrit on the day after Islamist extremists claimed to have created a new Islamic State. In their latest videos, jihadists claim their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, is now the caliph, or the leader of Muslims all over the world. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, has this.
Inshallah, this is not the first border we will break. Inshallah, we will break other borders also.
This was how one jihadist from ISIS announced the group's rebranding as IS, or Islamic State.
This is Iraq, this is Sham. But now, this is all one country, inshallah, one dawla, inshallah.
The group's latest videos show the symbolic bulldozing of the line between Syria and Iraq on the map, while a government building near the border is blown up for the camera. A medieval caliphate reborn for the social media age. Your guide is a militant known as Abu Safia, claimed to be from Chile in South America, though he says nationality doesn't matter.
There's no nationality, we are Muslims, there's only one country.
This is believed to be Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the new ruler now known as Caliph Ibrahim. His spokesman, blurred in the middle here, has declared that all other jihadist groups are under his control. And though there were celebrations on the Syrian side of the border last night, several senior Sunni clerics have denounced the move as illegitimate. ISIS is apparently succeeding where Al-Qaeda failed, but its ambition and extreme violence might turn out to be its undoing. There's already fighting between rival Sunni militant factions along the Syrian-Iraqi border, focused here in the town of Bukamal, and this fighting might begin to intensify. Today, this video appeared of an IS convoy apparently heading into Syria. The group's rapid success in Iraq may attract more foreign jihadists in the short term. But if it's fighting a rearguard action against Al-Qaeda and Sunni tribesmen, that could undermine its progress so far.
Jonathan Rugman reporting. Utter humiliation for David Cameron. That's how Labour's described the elevation of Jean-Claude Juncker to the presidency of the European Commission. But when the Prime Minister went to the Commons to report back on his failure to block the appointment, he was cheered to the rafters by his own side. But has success at home come at the expense of Britain's influence in Europe? Our Europe editor, Matt Fry, is at a German bar in central London this evening. Matt, what's the view there?
Well, Kathy, I'm sure you're a regular here at the Bierschenke in the city of London, and we're going to talk about football a little bit later in the programme, because this place is getting very crowded with everyone who's come here to see the Algeria-Germany game. But let's first of all talk about Europe. Now, if Germany and England weren't battling each other, as they do now and again on the football pitch, or once upon a time on the battlefield, they should really be united in so many ways, because they are both, after all, beer-swilling, football-loving, manufacturing, mainly Protestant, hard-working Northern European nations with a questionable climate. But these days, as we discovered today again, Europe, the issue of Europe, intervenes to make things a little bit more complicated.
We tend to focus on all the bad blood between Germany and Britain, but think of all the common bonds, starting at the very top. London's most opulent royal monument is dedicated to a German, Prince Albert, beloved husband and trusted mentor to Queen Victoria. The family living at this address used to be called Saxe-Coburg-Gotha before they changed their name during World War I. Once upon a time, the hostess would have been able to speak to her guest in German.
Very nice to see you. Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
It is a rare privilege for a head of government to be invited to tea by the Queen at all. It was his idea, of course. On her last visit, he even asked her up to the kitchen. But on Europe, no sofa can be big enough. In the spat over Mr. Juncker, David Cameron hoped to woo her on a boat in the middle of a Swedish lake. The setting was perfect. The Prime Minister had a captive audience. This was hailed as an anti-Juncker plot on water, until it emerged that it was the Prime Minister who was to be dunked overboard. Today in the House of Commons, he celebrated, or tried to at least, the nobility of his defeat.
We will always stand up for our principles, we will always defend our national interest, and we will fight with all we have to reform the EU over the next few years. And at the end of 2017, it will not be me or this Parliament or Brussels that decides Britain's future in the European Union. It will be the British people. And I commend this statement to the House.
Ed Miliband plunged the dagger with particular relish.
The truth is, the Prime Minister returned to Britain on Friday having failed. Not some mild, small failure, but an appalling failure of relationship building, winning support and delivering for Britain. I know it is inconvenient to remind him, but he lost by 26 votes to 2. And then he comes to this chamber and seems to claim it as a complete vindication of his tactics. His party may think it represents splendid isolation. It isn't. It is utter humiliation.
Such was the sound and fury generated by Europe that the Speaker was reduced to shouting.
Only this morning a teacher said to me in Speaker's House, "How can I tell a little boy in my class to behave when parliamentarians don't?" Be a good boy, get the message. Ed Miliband.
He might have been channeling Angela Merkel's exasperation with David Cameron, the enfant terrible of Europe, who's edging his country ever closer to the exit, by default, if not by design.
Matt Fryer, we're joined now from Strasbourg by the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage, the Prime Minister may be a defeated man, but he's succeeded in uniting his own party and rallying such people as Mr. Schäuble, the most important man in Mrs. Merkel's cabinet, and many others across Europe, Finland, Poland, into saying it's unimaginable, unthinkable that Britain can fall out of the EU, and they will do everything possible to prevent it.
Well, first things first, I mean, to see the Tory backbenchers tribally cheering the Prime Minister, I don't think means very much, because for most of the country, the idea that we can use British influence to renegotiate a good deal for Britain, that really was shot to bits last week by losing 26-2. On the second point, I think a lot of the Northern European leaders, and you've mentioned the countries, are very scared. That Cameron, his whole agenda now looks so broken that they're trying to say, look, we'll make some concessions, because they're really scared about Britain leaving. They're scared that when Britain leaves and has a simple free trade agreement, that actually their countries will want to do the same thing. But here's the problem. The problem is this, that to convince the British people in a referendum to vote to stay in the European Union, Mr. Cameron's going to have to achieve far more than Harold Wilson did 40 years ago.
But you've got a much bigger problem than he has. You have a much bigger problem than he has. You want a referendum. There's only one party that can win an election and get a referendum, and that is a fairly distant chance, but it is a chance, and that's the Conservatives. The Conservatives make it quite clear they will. Labour has refused to take your onion and call for a referendum, and they won't. And you've been banking on them doing so.
But we've heard all this before. You know, in 2009, Mr. Cameron won the European elections with a cast-iron guarantee of a referendum. In 2011, he repeatedly said and three-line whipped his own backbenchers to vote against a referendum. Now he's for a referendum. So the track record there isn't terribly good.
Nevertheless, you are the obstacle. You are the obstacle to getting a referendum. Your candidates are going to be
No.
stealing votes from Conservatives, and that will weaken his chances of calling a referendum. That's inescapable. You're a logical man, Mr. Farage. That's a fact.
Mr. Cameron's conversion to a more Eurosceptic agenda would not have happened had it not been for the strength of UKIP.
That may be, but you've got the prospect of your referendum. You've got the prospect of your referendum. He is the only one that can deliver it, and you are the only people who can stop him.
Yeah, well, in 2011, he was completely opposed to it. Now he says he's for it. I would say there is still a very strong probability that the Liberal Democrats and Labour at the next election will
vote Tory.
Good Lord, and vote for the man that lied to us before on this very issue? I don't think so. The way we'll get a referendum is if UKIP is able, particularly in its target seats, to repeat the kinds of success we've had in the English county elections, the district council elections and the European elections, and we get enough UKIP MPs into Westminster to hold the balance of power. That's the way there will be a referendum. And I would also point out that this old-fashioned idea that UKIP picks up middle-class Tory votes is completely belied by the fact that the whole of South Yorkshire, went purple on May the 22nd. And in Wales, a strong Labour area,
Couple of quick ones.
we finished up neck and neck with Labour.
Couple of quick ones. Who are you backing, Germany or Algeria?
Oh, I'm going to have to back Germany. After all, my wife is German.
So the Germans have you for there. Are you going to watch it in a bar? And have you ever been in a Brussels bar and met that other celebrated man with a pint, Mr. Juncker?
I have met Mr. Juncker, yes. I cross-thought at a cocktail party, yes. He is clearly a very social animal. But frankly, I think the whole debate about whether he drinks or smokes is frankly irrelevant. He's a federalist.
Because you do both.
But it just doesn't matter, does it, really? You know, I mean, clearly smokers and drinkers can be on both sides of the argument. No, I mean, Mr. Juncker wants a United States of Europe. The good thing about Mr. Juncker is he doesn't hide it. He says it as he sees it. And in terms of the British debate, that's a good thing.
As indeed do you. Thank you very much, Nigel Farage, for joining us from Strasbourg. Cathy.
Thanks, John.